Hi, this is Scott with the Android Guys podcast. I'm here today with John Choi. He is the Chief Product Officer at Coolpad Americas. We're going to talk a little bit about his role and Coolpad America or Coolpad, where they fit in the mobile landscape, some questions about their devices and how that process works, and maybe a little bit about how they the relationship with carriers and things that, we're going to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit and just kind of see how things operate from a different perspective. So, John, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
No, thank you. Very happy to join you on this podcast.
So tell us a little bit about, let's start with you, and then we'll go into Coolpad. A little bit about your background.
Yeah, so my name is John Choi, and I am the Chief Product Officer for Coolpad Americas. I've spent almost 20 years taking products from concept to launch, the majority of which were spent helping consumer electronics companies grow through innovative connected products. So I did this by helping companies like Samsung and TCL shift away from an engineering mindset towards a consumer-first mindset, because that really helps inform the design of the concept, and I help translate that into engineering execution and launch. So in my role today as Chief Product Officer for Coolpad Americas, I'm using this similar consumer-first recipe to help bring to market products that consumers will hopefully love.
That's awesome. That sounds like you kind of take the science and the business side of it and kind of put that aside and do more from the consumer perspective of how tech should work or how devices should operate for people or what we can do with those. Would that be a way of looking at it?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So a very important data point that is very difficult to digest and gather is understanding that consumer mindset, really understanding, getting to the heart of the issue that a consumer electronics company is empowered to solve.
Okay. So how did you come to work with Coolpad? Was this just a slow trajectory in one direction, or have you kind of bounced around different things?
Yeah, so just a little background on Coolpad first, maybe. So Coolpad's a global company, and they have a great DNA around developing connected products. They have over 25 years of mobile technology experience, thousands and thousands of patents related to mobile technology, and with a great number of firsts. And they did this in the smartphone space. What I wanted to do was help a company like Coolpad grow their portfolio towards things like kids' wearables, trackers, and all sorts of other devices that you'll see from us in the future. But because of my interest in that space, I was very attracted to Coolpad, because with that power of that understanding of how to bring in high quality, well-connected products into the market, that DNA is required to build this portfolio of things. And I thought that would be a good fit there.
Okay. So as you do your devices or your products portfolio, what's the genesis of those? Is it a discussion, a pain point that you want to address? Maybe a carrier comes to you. Where does something new get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. The best way for us to frame this is the process will begin in one of two ways. The first one is Coolpad driven, where with the research that we have, with the partners that we talk to, we identify an opportunity and we find a need and we want to build to solve that need. The second part of that is carrier driven here in the US, where carriers find an opportunity or a need and bring that to the table as well and ask for companies like Coolpad to participate in a collaboration with them to build a device to market. Both process approaches require collaboration with our carrier partners. And an example I'll give on the Coolpad-driven aspect is our recent Dyno smartwatch project, right? Coolpad has identified a gap in the market. We find that in our race towards hyperconnectivity, and by hyperconnectivity, I'm referring to handsets. We're all after cheaper, better handsets. But in doing so, we sort of left families behind. And I'm referring to my grandparents and I'm referring to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So the Dino smartwatch is really designed to solve the problem for parents who have kids, and I've got two 6-year-olds. But I want to make sure that smartwatch have the easiest out-of-box experience, because we know that not everyone is technically savvy, right? And there's a lot of complexity around changing SIMs and so on. So we had to create this easy out-of-box experience where a parent can just go to a store, a Toys R Us or another retailer, or online, buy the box, and very simply download a companion app, pair the device, and have it work straight out of the box. So that was very important to us. The second one was being able to travel internationally between the U.S. and Canada, because a lot of the parents we spoke to was curious about that. They wanted that functionality. A lot of the smartwatches out there today were only limited to either Canada or the U.S. So in solving this problem, it was an opportunity that Coolpad identified, but we required deep collaboration with a carrier partner to deliver this experience. So that's an example of a Coolpad-driven example, if that helps.
No, that does. It's an interesting point that we kind of take for granted that we live in this era of smartphones, and that's the first device that a lot of people use for the internet. It's what a lot of people use to just kind of stay connected to the world, and we just kind of assume or take for granted that everybody that comes behind us is going to just kind of glom onto this and understand it, and they're just kind of be born into this world where there's still a huge segment of people who may have apprehension, who may not have the understanding or the desire to kind of learn something that can be as complicated as a phone or a wearable. So there's a lot of people that in my circle that I'll talk to that, when I discuss a connected home product or a wearable or something, you can kind of see their eyes gloss over a little bit because they feel intimidated or they don't know. And it's like, oh, I'll just have you help me with that when it comes time to set that up, because there's a lot of, I guess, preconceived ideas of how difficult things have to be. So it's nice to see, or refreshing to hear, that you take that approach of let's keep it simple, and getting them when they're young, of course, it makes sense, because it becomes this is how you not just use it, but how it becomes part of your life, to where you're not necessarily beholden, but kids can kind of follow along and say, hey, this is a part of my life that I use as a tool, not as just a constant, my face is in this thing.
Right. And so I don't know if you have children, but with my 6-year-olds, if I think about how I interact with them every day, near the genesis of this project, we were very, we found it interesting that you were able to stay connected to things like your home, right, and your friends and colleagues. But when my kids go to school, when they're 6 years old, and I want to be able to synchronize activities with my wife, there was not a very elegant solution to that. I could give them low-cost smartphones, but the chance of them, but I'm looking for a low-cost smartphone because they're going to lose it, number one.
Sure.
I could give them a hand-me-down, but then there are things in the hand-me-down product that I may not want them to have access to. For example, access to my Netflix account and things like that. And it's a lot of work that's required for a parent to reset the device, make sure it's clean, and then pass it down to a child to use. And which is why we felt that the smartwatch product was a very, very good fit for that segment. And, my kids use it today. I use it with my wife to synchronize. And, my kids have become so used to it that now they order me to go to their north gate or the south gate of their school to go pick them up, because when, the area we live in, where the school is, it's near a residential district that's very high traffic, and parents are queued up for miles. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, having my son and daughter, they're twins, tell me where to come pick them up actually eases that traffic, right? Instead of sort of guessing, oh, my children are not here, I'm going to have to drive a little further out, right? And I've just wasted that time lighting up. So it's things like this, the very little things like this that we identified when we spoke to parents, and through my own personal experience, help drive the solution to that problem.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk to the parents or you get your research and your feedback, is that something where you guys are, you have a group of people that you poll, or do you have focus groups? How do you go about getting that feedback?
We do focus groups. Internally, there are a lot of parents at Coolpad, so that was a good source of primary information when we first start off the project. And then using that information, we start building theories, right? We build a thesis around what could work. Then that's when we sort of open the gate to a closed focus group where they're covered with NDAs and so on. And we get to ask them, very, very specific questions to get a richer feedback. So that's really the process. We'll also do UI tests where we would have a mock product and have them engage, and we would observe how they interact with the device with their children, right? So do they strap it on? Does the child go out and try and attach, wear the watch on their own? And these are very, very good signals and interesting signals to have. A lot of the times, the reason why our watch, as an example, had that strap design was because parents would strap it on for the child. Almost never the child would try an attempt on its own, on their own, to put the watch on. So for us, having a strap that a parent can secure well, just a standard strap, was a good learning, because otherwise, when you come to product design, you have to think about, do I put the antenna into the actual product itself, the body of the watch, or do I pull the antenna and put it out into the straps and make the strap non-interchangeable? But, parents have given us that feedback that they want it interchangeable, that they're happy to put it on. They want to put it on and adjust. Instead of having kids do that, was a good insight example that I could share with you.
Nice. Now, when you have a product that, such as the watch, when you bring it to market, do you look at something like this in particular? Do you say, hey, this will be something that we want to kind of offer direct, or work with a carrier or a retailer to kind of get this out there? How do you guys make those decisions?
So we want to look at who we want to target first. And in this case, we wanted to have a direct connection to parents. The reason why is because this is our first generation smartwatch. It's a fantastic product, but inside, as a product guy, I know that we won't have nailed all the problems today, right? So it's very important for Coolpad, a company like Coolpad, to build that direct relationship with the customer. So owning that relationship was very key, and it was very strategic in our part, because as the product goes out, we're going to get further feedback, usage rates. Parents don't like this function, or they found, a new use case that we haven't thought about. Things like this, we needed that feedback, unfiltered feedback, without another partner in play. So for us, it was very important to build that relationship with the consumer, help the consumer understand our mission around building a device that helps parents and families, and build and start a conversation with them. And that's what really drove our strategy to launching Dino One in open market, if you will.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about phones now, as far as just some general questions? Okay.
Yeah.
When you have, phone companies, they tend to have, hey, this is our flagship experience, this is our mid-range, or this is, we have this usage or target user in mind for this particular device. Can you talk a little bit about your portfolio as you guys define it, or maybe a target demographic for, particular models, or as, maybe who the Coolpad brand goes after?
Yeah. So Coolpad has found a nice niche in the sub 200 space. The sub 200 space is what we call the ultra affordable space. The sub 400 market is the piece of the pie that we're after, which is the affordable market. And that's how we define the market opportunity, if you will, from a price perspective of the device. Now, from there, the market is very well understood because the market is very mature. We have a very good understanding of user behavior and their expectations for certain specific price points. And what we do is we work with carriers to get the carrier requirements. So things like banding requirements, device integrity requirements, must-have preloads, and things like that. And then the consumer requirements that we define by a price point. So we understand that those who are looking for the more affordable will be more budget restricted. They are looking for, a decent camera, storage, media experiences, which they expect from a price within certain price points, right? So the $49.99, the $149, and the $199. Mm-hmm. These are sort of the big four, like, sweet spot lanes, if you will, where these experiences are well defined.
I know from the perspective of, having followed it as a blogger or, on this side of the fence for a decade now, I've seen mm-hmm. the consumer focus, at least from what I can tell, has gone away from, everything was $200 because everything was subsidized in the first few years of smartphones to, now we know the true cost of what these devices are, and we kind of have an expectation as to, hey, this is a flagship, so this is going to probably run $700 to $1,000 now.
Right, yeah.
Versus, a few years back, we kind of saw Motorola inching a little bit down to that 500 and below, and now where they're in the G and the E series is kind of in that price point that you pointed out, that for a lot of the first couple of years I saw this kind of push to early adopt, and these fanboys and tech heavy enthusiasts and people who really wanted all of this, had these expectations of, we got to keep moving the needle forward. And we have this kind of like almost a sense of entitlement as to, hey, no, wait a second, you guys didn't really do anything this year and you still want to get this much money out of me. Where for me, I've watched it, I have a son who's 15, so I've watched him kind of grow up in the space and see that, what you really need is not always what you necessarily want, or vice versa. And what you can actually kind of get away with versus where you can cut corners. And so I've really started to have more of a fondness for the people who can kind of put together these value packages for below that $200, because I look at that and I think that's really where a lot of people, in my circle, that's where a lot of people actually play. They look for that, well, is it worth spending the extra money for this? There's that you get what you pay for kind of mentality, but then it's, hey, you know what? I've got 2 kids. We're on a family plan. We're looking at maybe prepaid or a first-time buyer. We have to look at it with our wallet. So I'm really kind of a fan of what the different phone makers are able to do at that, as the price point that you identified.
Yeah, and Scott, you really nailed it on the head. I mean, some of these devices cost as much as a high-end refrigerator, right? Mm-hmm. A refrigerator has years of utility, and you're right. The cycle of how quickly companies are pumping out these 800-plus devices is very fast. So there is this gap that we see. From a volume perspective, you're right. So if you look at the market size, right, the market for affordable devices, which I previously defined as sub 400. When you look at the size of that market, and you look at the size of the premium market that's above the 800, the numbers are not too dissimilar, right? They're about the same size, which goes to your point that there is a group it's not left behind, but what we call them are smart buyers. They are very aware that of the reality that the commonly used applications that we use every day are not exclusive to the $800 plus devices. Mm-hmm. I mean, how fast do you really need Facebook or WhatsApp to load at, right?
Right.
They work at the low end. So that's why we call them smart buyers, because they understand what they're going after with their dollars, because they know that there are products at those price points that can still deliver a great experience for their really, really key applications, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we know that the Uber application will work on a sub $50 device, as well as a higher-end $800 device, because they both have GPS, they both have 4G LTE, right? And they both have processing capacity and memory that allows the app to run.
Right.
I've yet to run into a device where I'm unable to download an application from the Google App Store because my specifications don't fit.
Right.
There are some on the higher end, right, that do have that. For example, Google's Daydream, right, as an example, that requires a certain product. But if you look at that world right now, it's a very niche market. You're right. It's all the tech sphere. It's those who are interested in that experience that buy and go after those devices. And, we're more than happy for them to go buy those devices. But for the market that Coolpad is focused on, we know that they want a great experience watching Netflix. We know that they want a decent camera, decent storage. They want email to work. They want voice, text, these things to work well out of the box. They want their social media applications. And even when it comes to games, and I'm sure you realize this as well, Scott, it's that it's this very simple, what we call toilet seat games. They're not really these high-end 3D, in-depth PC grade experiences. We are seeing that on the PUBG type of games that we see coming down the line, but the reality is still today, if you look at Annie, for example, a lot of the applications we use don't require these $800 devices just yet.
Right. In the first couple of generations, we saw you actually need this much RAM, this type of processor, and it was almost like the computer, video game industry, 20 years ago, where you kind of said, "Oh, I kind of need to stay ahead of the curve if I want that." But we've seen the hardware iterate faster than consumer needs, and when somebody asks me personally, "Hey, do I need that phone?" No, if you have to ask that question, you've already answered it. If generally, I'm finding that people who are asking, "Hey, the S10 is out. Should I get that?" Or a lot of times people say, "Okay, now it's time for me to buy last year's because it's cheaper," and people are buying because they can afford it or because they know I can upgrade, get something new to me that I don't have to spend as much money. So the ultra affordable and the affordable, I as people get into these families and multiple lines and do all of these shared accounts, it gets to be too expensive to say, "Hey, you know what? My teen kids, I'm going to get them both something that's $30-$40 per month for the next 2 years." It just doesn't make sense to a lot of people.
Right, and Scott, I mean, how often do we hear that question? Right, you're right on the money there. When I think about performance, right? Let's use car speeds as an analogy. If you buy a car that can easily hit 300 miles per hour, it's easy for that car to hit 100 miles per hour, but you'll be paying upwards of $300,000, $400,000 for that product or that car. It's when it comes to product development, and this is the challenge that I think people may not understand, is that when you have a very expensive engine, a very nice steering, and you have the luxury of buying these components and have a market to sell these components to, then of course you can hit these experiences, right? You can hit the bleeding edge experiences that consumers will want: faster, better, more, right? But imagine if consumers really only had a budget for a bicycle, and I had to as a product person, design a bicycle to travel at 100 miles per hour. And that's really a challenge. And, I've had the luxury of working at both a large company like Samsung, where, I was part of the product planning process for these 800 plus devices, and at TCL and now Coolpad, where we're looking at this lower cost market. And I can tell you that it's a lot more challenging to really, really squeeze the juice out of a lower cost device. And the Illumina is a great example of this product. Mm-hmm. Although from, experience is a perception. And when a user gets their hands on the device, they will understand why the device performs at a certain level for a certain price point. But what we do is make sure that we look and benchmark at competing products with similar specifications out there in the market, because that's who I'm competing against.
Right.
And you're familiar with tools like Antutu, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that there are products out there that we've tested to see their Antutu scores and our pure goal was to beat that score. We know and expect that there may be certain experiences that consumers may not feel like it's up to par. But when you're given, a bicycle to try and make, right, and that's the price point that consumers want at, but they want that to go at 100 miles per hour, it may not get there, but I can guarantee you that we're looking at ways to try and squeeze, 80 miles per hour compared to our customers who may be running at 60 miles per hour.
Sure.
So I hope that analogy makes sense for you and add some color as to some of the challenges that we face when we're producing these low-cost devices, because it's very easy for people to think, oh, this is just, cheaply made. It was just, it's like pieces of Lego that was connected together, which is not the case. There's actually a lot more discussions and debates with partners, because we want to minimize the size of the operating system, as an example, right? We want to minimize the overhead of applications that run on the product. We want to design the operating system or add these adjustments where if it detects a camera application, for example, we dedicated more cores and processing to that application temporarily and slow other things down. And there's all sorts of algorithms in play that we have to design to ensure that we're getting the best that we can out of the components, because we know that there is a market out there for those who don't have as large of a budget as some of the others do.
So that brings up an interesting point, and you touched on it a little bit. When I'm reviewing a device, and I've seen this more and more over the years, it isn't so much that the device itself gives me a certain type of experience. It's that it's colored through a lens of, I use a different device for my own needs on a daily basis. I carry something that gives me X, and I'm now comparing this to that. So I start to look at, okay, well, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. And then I look at it and go, now, wait a second, this thing is 1/8 of that cost, or, just even half. It's a big difference. And for a lot of the time when I'm looking at one particular model versus another that may not be a flagship, I've often said on its own, or if you're upgrading, the perspective of, if you've got a phone that's maybe 3 years old and it's time to upgrade, this might be a small step forward, but it's still going to be a step forward than what you have, because you've got a more current version of Android. You've got a little bit more, the software is updated, more secure, more optimized. But it's only when you compare it to other things that you kind of get that, oh, well, it doesn't have that. And, well, that company only makes cheap phones. Well, it's for a reason, I think. And as you've, kind of touched on here, trying to squeeze as much as you can and competing maybe on a particular device versus trying to say, hey, all we're capable of is putting out this type of hardware. Let me ask this. Do you guys, because I know that in certain circles, they're going to look at let's just say, the bullet points and the specs and say, now this looks like it's an old phone, or this thing looks like something out of 2015, 4 years old. They must be doing it to keep the cost down, or must be too, it's cheap, or, just all these, there's different ways of looking at that. How do you guys approach that? Is it, hey, USB-C versus a micro USB port, the screen resolution, how do you guys address that? Do you have like a tier or like a totem pole of, well, this is primarily the first thing we want to focus on to keep the cost down?
That's correct. So at these price points where people are on a budget, it's very important for us to understand those sweet spot lanes that I talked about before. And what we do is we ask ourselves, what is the problem we're trying to solve for consumers here? And do consumers who want let's say, for example, a $50 smartphone, do they want, a $1,000 device level of photography? And the answer to that is no. And the reason why we know that is because we've seen our products sell, and we've spoken to the consumers who buy these products. A lot of the times, they understand where the benchmark is, and they see these great photographs from an $800 to $1,000 devices. As an example, we take photography example. But the reality is you don't need those if you're posting it on Instagram, as an example, right? As long as you have great lighting, great color reproduction, those really tick the boxes for this market that's looking, in the affordable segment. Whereas at the higher end, I've spoken to a lot of people that use their iPhone as a professional tool, as an example, because the camera is at that grade. But when we look at the average consumer who's on a budget, and we speak to them, we realize that they don't really need it all the way up here. You can't see me doing my hand-arm signals, Scott. I just realized that I was like moving my hand around. I apologize, but that's how we do it, right? And again, we have to deal with economics. If they're looking for a $50 phone, where do we focus our BOM? Do we focus our BOM on the display? But then if you do that, you sort of lose out on the processing side. Do we put it all on the processing? But then you sort of have to, lose on the display side. So it's really finding this sweet spot middle that's taken years for the industry to do. But since the market has matured, it's all pretty straightforward from my perspective.
Right. No, and that's. I know every device is unique, and if you continually put out one thing at $100 and maybe one at $150, they can't be too much different. But I know that certain times it's like, well, this one might have 32 gigabytes of storage and a micro SD, where the other one is 16 gigabytes.
Right.
And, maybe this one has USB-C versus the micro USB. So I know that those are kind of like, you give and take, and you have to kind of say, who's the user. And I think that's some of that onus is on the user to say which is the device that's right for me, and to have to say, I don't care about taking pictures. I want to get on and just, I'm not printing anything out. I just want to snap a few pictures when I'm out with my friends, put them on Twitter and Facebook, and be done. So, in regards to your devices, I know that you guys have the cool UI as opposed to like the standard, Android experience or the stock vanilla Android experience. Is that a conscious decision? Yeah. Do you guys see something that is missing in Android, or that you think you might be able to offer differently or better?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Scott. So I'll frame it this way. We're not here to bring gimmicks as a way to try and just differentiate ourselves. The cool UI, and what I need to stress about the cool UI is that it's still very close to stock Android. But what the cool UI label helps us with is it helps bubble up these convenience features, right, that will be of value to the consumers in that budget. So, for example, one of the things we brought in is this multi-finger unlocks that will quickly open an app depending on which finger you use. Another convenience feature that we put in is what we call scrolling screenshots. And what that does is, we all know that web pages are not a single page that fits nicely onto a display. We know that there are pages and pages of content. So when you screenshot, instead of doing multiple screenshots, you have a scrolling screenshot where it would capture the entire content of the page. Mm-hmm. So it's convenience features like this that we feel and that we see in our research that consumers want, right? It's just from their behaviors. And Cool UI is a label that helps us bubble those up. And I wouldn't say a gap, but what I would say is, a gap from Android. But what I would say is that it is plus alphas, right? Features and behaviors that we see the consumers doing, right? Having trouble with on these lower cost phones. And we want to help them by bringing these things. And by providing this marketing label, the Cool UI, it helps bubble these features up, so that they become aware of it and use it.
Okay. No, and that makes sense. I know the common perception for guys that review a lot of the phones is sometimes having a stock Android experience is the only way to go. And for others, they say, I'm okay with what this brand has done. It's dialed it back a little bit. One of the main concerns over the years has been there's so much involved, and it's so deep within the UI and the OS that it takes forever to get a major update, or for a carrier or anybody to roll out a software update. Do you guys have, as far as software, do you guys have an expectation or an idea in mind as to like supporting? Is it like software security bugs and patches that you care about, or can consumers kind of expect like a major software update with the devices, or is it you get what you bought at the time? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for us, and moving forward, security is security and privacy are very, very important topics for Coolpad. You know, security and privacy is a trend that Coolpad has identified to be very, very key when it comes to buyers' purchase decision. And we don't think it gets enough attention in public, to be honest with you. So for us, this is a deep part of our mission. It's a core pillar of our mission to bring in devices that are secure. And this is why we are very, very adamant on making sure that our devices support all the latest Google security MRs. And this is a promise that we're making to our users as we move forward.
Okay.
Having said that, OS upgrades, which includes feature set, is a little bit, is more of a complex discussion. And the reason why is because we need to look at several things. For example, if you introduce these new features through an OS upgrade, does it decay the performance of the device, right? Mm-hmm. Which is big because the OS grows over time to add more features, nice eye candy and things like that. Is there a way for us to remove those? And this is why this complexity brings that in. And when you have a product that's known to set to achieve a certain volume, and this goes down to economics, the question then becomes, the debate becomes, is there enough to justify the cost, right, of doing this upgrade? And is it enough to justify the benefit for our consumers for this upgrade? So all those are very subjective, which is why when we look at the core of the issue, which is security, that is a must for us. But when it comes to feature upgrades, we will be definitely looking at a case-by-case basis because of those discussion points and those considerations that need to be made.
Sure.
So I hope that gives you some idea of where our heads are at.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's been a big focus when I tend to review different devices from other companies over time. There are ones where you'll look at it and say, I can't say for sure if you'll ever get a software update. My concern is whether or not you get, if there's a vulnerability that's found that somebody's exploiting a particular build of Android, that hopefully this company is able to address that. So that I've seen, I like that approach. I think that having the security is what people care about. I run into more and more people, and my perspective has changed over time of how many people know that a software update is available, how many people care, how many people I've run into to say, hey, you have that phone. Did you get Android X yet? Or did you get Y? And they're like, I don't know what's different about that. And do I care? And, I don't like the way they changed it because it used to be here. Now it's there. And my phone seems to run slower now. It's supposed to be better with software updates. So I can understand the dilemma and appreciate that, you have to kind of err on the side of, you know what? I don't think these people in this target demographic really even care enough to say, hey, this thing doesn't have Android Pie out of the box. Why should I have an expectation of Android Q a year from now? So I can appreciate the security focus first.
Right.
What is the typical timeline from when you get started on making a device and with the idea and the genesis of, hey, this is what we want to do, versus ultimately release to the public? I know that it has to have shortened over the years, but what is it for you guys?
That's right. So if we look at what I will label as low complexity projects, they can typically launch between 3 to 6 months, depending on whether there's been a product that's similar to it that's been built before that can be leveraged. For higher complexity products, they could easily reach a year from concept all the way to launch. Hopefully, it gives you an idea of some of the timeframes.
No, it does, and it's still, as I've seen it. It's still a lot shorter than the way it used to be, just kind of industry at whole. You talked about, like with the feedback and getting the user kind of reactions and what you guys, find internally, your relationships with carriers. Are you seeing any particular trends where users are caring more about something specifically, or things that they might want from their devices?
Yeah. So first trend is we are still seeing this path towards affordability. People want more for less, and that is definitely something that is a part of our goal. The second one I talked about briefly was this rising awareness around security and privacy. It seems like every day we're inundated with some sort of news about a security breach of some sort, password leaks, horror stories about people remotely tracking your device as an example. So we are very aware of that security aspect. And to give you an idea of what may be coming ahead, for Coolpad, we are very, very aware that SMRs on its own fails to alleviate that concern from the consumer. And the reason why is because security MRs are very technical. They feel it's a security update. It's like on Windows 10 when you see those knowledge-based updates. You see the number, you're learning that it's becoming more secure, but your understanding of the risks hasn't gone up, right? You feel like you're taken care of, but you're still in this unknown world. And what you'll see from Coolpad going forward is better conversations with the market about what precisely we are doing to help alleviate very, very specific concerns that they may have about purchasing a product from a company like Coolpad as an example.
Okay.
Right. So, yeah, I'm not ready to share those details just yet, Scott. So I
Sure.
apologize, but I wanted to put that trend out there for you.
Absolutely.
And the third one is this leaving the families behind trend, and this is true, and a lot of it is to do with the points you brought up, Scott, which was, the hardware has accelerated so much, right, that we sort of haven't really accelerated the experiential or the applications or the use cases to justify those kind of devices just yet. And what we're finding is, like, for example, children, is there a good handset that you can think of today for kids? This is something that we're working on with the information that we're getting, with the research that we're doing with parents, to bring a product that helps address that problem. The Dino smartwatch is just the very first of these products that you will see come to market that helps address this need that parents and sons and daughters are having as they think about their interconnected lives.
Okay. And kind of getting back to the phones, do you see or have you noticed a trend of consumers being a little bit more educated and open to the idea of buying direct versus having to go to a carrier and kind of walk them through the process of needs assessment? Have you noticed anything in that regard?
No. So there's a few things. We find that the direct-to-consumer model is great for building conversation and helping consumers understand what we as a company bring to the table. But in terms of distribution, carriers are still very much the gatekeepers to that market. And the reason why is because carriers bring a lot to the table. Number one is they, aside from the connectivity service, they're bringing in significant value-added services that are very attractive to the consumer, which are things like, deals with entertainment companies, for example, streaming entertainment companies, audio companies, things like that, right? They also have economical incentives, right? Like, for example, buy one, get one free, which are subsidized via the cost of the subscription. Now, because they have these levers that they can push and pull, I feel that they will always be the strongest distributor when it comes to devices and experiences into the marketplace. And we all know that there's only a certain amount of real estate that can be dedicated to educating consumers about, certain classes of devices. And I spoke about the smartwatch before. One of the reasons why we wanted to go direct to consumer first, to start enabling those conversations first, is one of the reasons why we do that. So to answer your question, Scott, I think the answer is not really, because they still get a lot of their information direct from adverts, from visiting the store. That's very much the consumer purchase journey today. They may shop for a device online, but the data we see is that more than 80% is still going through carriers, and I think it's for those reasons that I stated before.
Okay. No, and that's insightful. I mean, I kind of had an assumption one way or the other. I kind of maybe wrongly thought that, consumers by and large are more educated and willing to do that. But as you start to, put it out there and I hear it, it makes sense that these are still the places that people trust. These are the places that people have come to respect and expect to kind of walk them through that process and to put them in the right product. So it does make a lot of sense as you put it out there. So maybe just a couple quick questions here as we wrap. What's on the agenda for Coolpad now? Like, what's coming, near term, long term? Any particular products or initiatives or anything that you can talk about?
Yeah. So our focus is really about educating the market about Coolpad 2.0. Our mission, the mission to be the leading provider of technology for families, and how our products can help families. And to do this, we are working with carriers. We're building and wrapping up our website to talk about these challenges. And we will be rolling out products, not just the kids' smartwatch, that address these needs specifically.
Okay. And do you have, as far as like particular smartphones, are you looking at, you mentioned moving kind of from the ultra affordable to the affordable. Is that something that we might see more products that way, or maybe one-off?
You will. And in the smartphone space, we are still going for the affordable, but this is still a great device angle. And we talked about security. And we know that entertainment is a big driver of smartphone products, right? Great camera, great display. And you'll see those being offered by us in the very, very near future.
Okay.
This year, in fact. Yeah.
Great. John, this was really informative. I appreciate you spending the time to kind of tell the Coolpad story and a little bit about how you guys work. It's to me, it's always interesting to kind of pull the curtain back and see, what goes on this particular production. So, thanks for taking basically an hour of your time with me today. I do appreciate that.
No, thank you for the opportunity. It's always fun to talk about this with people like yourself, and I definitely joined it. And thank you for the opportunity.